once again for RFA Insider.
That was Amy and I'm Eugene, and this is our 10th episode. We've hit the big 1-0. Go us, go us. It's our birthday. No, it's not. It's our 10th episode anniversary. Raise the roof, everybody. Woo, woo, woo.
Oh, okay. Today on RFA Insider, we have two stories in the rundown, one from China and one related to international sports.
And then on How It's Made, we're talking about Thich Minh Tue, an unofficial monk who's gone viral in Vietnam for his barefoot pilgrimage across the country. And we're talking to Truong Son from the Vietnamese service all the way in Taipei.
As always, you can expect all of that and more. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the RFA Insider podcast, made by two real-life staffers at Radio Free Asia.
If you'd like to send us feedback, there are many ways you can do this.
You can send us an email at insider@rfa.org.
You can comment on our webpage at rfa.org/English/insider. Just click on the episode you're listening to and write your comment below.
Or you can send us a tweet at RFA Insider or visit us in person.
No, don't visit us in person.
Right, don't visit us in person. But anyway, we really want to hear from you.
So tune in every other Friday and we'll take you behind the scenes.
And tell you what the news really means here at RFA Insider. All right, so 10 episodes. How does it feel, Amy?
Feels big, Eugene. We're officially in double digits now.
That's awesome. When you first started, you said, I think it's a really good thing that we got to our second episode. But, we're at 10. We've been at this for, 20 weeks now?
20 weeks?
Yeah. And you could say that actually this is our 12th episode because, we had those two double episodes in
right.
episode 7 and episode 9. But, according to the official RFA Insider canon, double episodes count as a single episode. So this is just 10. And I think we're in a good point here with episode 10. It's the middle of the summer. It's nice and hot and wonderful. And I think, what if we were to get to episode 100 one day?
That'd be nuts.
Would that be great or would that be kind of sad?
Both can be true.
Yeah, I suppose so. But of course, we should just keep continuing. And I don't know what's the next milestone after 10. Would it be 25 or
20? Why 25?
Well, because it's a quarter to 100, right?
Oh, I see. I was going to say 20 would be fun.
Yeah,
already.
I guess so. Maybe 20 and then 30. But you could go up by every 10. But I was thinking, 10 and then 25 and then 50. And then after that, it's 100 and then it's 500 or whatever. But if we were doing it for 500, that would be 1,000 weeks. And how many years is that? I don't think we're going to get to there. We'll see.
But, of course, some things don't change, so we'll have to start each episode with a little
Podcast Free Asia. So first off, before we get into this edition of Podcast Free Asia, I'd like to give a shout out to our coworker Cherry, who is RFA's audience editor. Cherry gave us a lot of suggestions on how to get downloads and listens, and she suggested asking people during this podcast to like and subscribe.
Naturally, we assumed we were so charismatic that everybody would be doing that already, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So please like, subscribe, favorite, or follow this podcast on whichever platform you're listening to.
All right. So today on Podcast Free Asia, we have two listener comments, too. And in another first, both actually address stuff that we talked about.
Wow. So first from our webpage, in response to episodes 9A and 9B, Naylin writes, "He is open-minded and first friendly gay from Myanmar. Proud of myself to know him." So those who listen to our Pride episodes will know that Naylin is referring to Po Kwa, who joined our Pride episode panel and called himself Myanmar's first openly gay journalist.
Yeah, it was really a big pleasure to have him in the studio with us. And I think the stories he told were really, really good. So thank you for this wonderful comment. I won't get into much detail, but I can just say I imagine his childhood would have been a little bit easier if there were people out there in media representing and covering the LGBTQIA+ community. But let's go on to our next comment. And this one, coming once again from YouTube, which we said was not one of the ways that you should contact us, but we'll read it anyway. This username is Thunderfarter.
That's so horrendous.
All right. If pride is so great, why need to hear it and propagate it 24/24 about it then?
Okay. Let's get into it.
All right, go for it.
So there was a time not so long ago in America where LGBT people were treated with a lot of shame, which translated into social and legal oppression. And there's a quote from the Argonauts in which Maggie Nelson writes, I wanted to live in a world where the antidote to shame is not honor, but honesty. And this was kind of the idea behind the Pride movement, which is about subverting societal shame by openly and loudly celebrating your identity as an LGBTQIA person. So we also have coworkers who grew up in countries where pride isn't nearly as loud and proud. So if you listen to what they have to say in the episode, hopefully you'll understand why it's important that we continue the conversation about LGBTQIA experiences as well as acceptance.
So a lot of times people will say, why do we have to keep hearing about it all the time whenever controversial topics are discussed? Mm-hmm. And drawing from my own personal experience in podcasting, a recurring theme in my previous podcast was Asian American representation. And even if the individual topic of each episode was not about that, one listener wrote in saying that it was grating to hear me talk about it all the time. And even suggested, why don't we do just one episode on Asian American representation, get it all out of there, and then we won't need to address it again. That way you could focus on what the podcast is really about. But I just wanted to say that that's simply not realistic, and it kind of defeats the purpose of bringing it up in the first place. If there's something in society that bothers us to the point that we wanted to bring about change, talking about it often is the only way to get other people to think about it and discuss it often. And it's not realistic to expect people to just really think about or talk about something if you're only going to just say one thing and never bring it up again.
Right.
And, on RFA Insider also, he says, why do we have to hear about it all the time? We've only brought it up once with that episode, and maybe 2 or 3 times if you count the times we just made a brief passing reference to Thailand's marriage equality law. So I'm assuming that Thunderfart is seeing a lot of pride content in other places that they aren't used to seeing it, and perhaps that's making them uncomfortable. I'm going to use the pronoun them because I don't know the gender of Thunderfart. At the very least, they're annoyed with rainbow flags and rainbow-themed coffee cups because they feel like the message to respect LGBTQIA plus people is being beaten into them by quote-unquote woke liberals. And I'm not saying this to mock Thunderfarter. I know that complaining about just acknowledging pride casts you in the same lot as those who complain about people saying Happy Holidays in December rather than Merry Christmas, or people who complain about Black Captain America or woke Star Trek. So if you want to be in that lot, then that's fine. Finally, listening to RFA Insider is voluntary, and if you want to live in a bubble where you don't hear or see anything about Pride during Pride Month, you don't have to listen to an episode clearly labeled as Pride-themed. And perhaps ironically, your message expressing annoyance about hearing people talk about Pride is making us talk about pride.
Woohoo.
And by the way, the proper expression is 24/7, not 24/24. But with that, let's get into
the rundown.
Woohoo!
The rundown.
All right, Eugene, it's safe to say that you're the most authoritative source on marriage in this recording booth.
Why?
Dare I say this studio? So
I'm the only married one, I suppose.
Yes.
Okay.
When you were younger, did you have any expectations that you'd get married? And was there a certain age that you thought you'd get married by?
Well, interestingly, I got married at age 32, which I thought was kind of old, to tell you the truth. When I was younger, I felt like I should be married even earlier than that. And whether that comes from my religious upbringing or my own personality as a hopeless romantic, let me elaborate. Every relationship that I had gotten into when I was young, in my teens and my 20s, it was like I have to see myself getting married to this person. Otherwise, what's the point?
So you were all endgame.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's like, why would you want to waste your time going through all the drama with one person if you're just going to break up anyway, right?
I see.
But eventually as I got older and I got closer to 30, I was like, maybe this isn't going to happen, and maybe I shouldn't go into relationships thinking like, hey, I have to get married with this person. And I started to do more things more casually and thought, hey, I could just not get married and that would be fine. But then, when I turned 30, I just figured, well, I'll just be single the rest of my life. But then something happened and I was married 2 years later. So, yeah.
So it sounds like your ideal age was before 30 then.
Yeah, I think I would have liked to have been married around 27, 28. That's what I was thinking back then. I'm actually glad I waited.
Okay. So I picked this story because I'm turning 29 soon, and I'm kind of a bit shocked at how much panic I feel about it. So this whole thing is really a ruse for me to work through my feelings about marriage.
When you were younger then, like what age did you think that you wanted to be married at, like as a kid?
Well, I never really there are kids who are like, oh, I want a big wedding and stuff like that. I was never that. I was just like, oh yeah, wedding. Okay. Like very neutral.
I see.
But then as I get older, I'm not even getting pressured by outside people, but I just feel like the societal expectations, I've internalized them a lot more than I thought.
I see.
So I feel more pressure on myself to have hit a certain milestone at a certain point.
I see.
I never really fantasized about like having a wedding or getting married or even engaged. But I guess I also never seriously considered the flip side, which is, of course, staying unmarried or single. So whether intentionally or not, more and more young people in China are also staying unmarried, whether by choice or by, their circumstances. So plummeting marriage rates are affecting basically all of East Asia, but this RFA report is about China, so we can talk about China.
Yeah, let's focus on China.
Marriage rates rose a little bit after COVID-19 restrictions were lifted, but then as a whole, they've dropped nearly 56% over the last 9 years.
Marriages per year. This is what we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay. So compared with 9 years ago, in the last year, half as many people were married.
Yep.
Okay.
So part of this is the result of policy. China's one child per family policy spanned 3 decades and ended in 2015.
Right.
But it created this huge imbalance of more men since, of course, Chinese families favor sons over daughters. So I think the stat, maybe fact check me if I'm wrong, but I think it was around 15 million more men than women in China at this point.
Okay.
Which, makes some issues you try and pair people up.
Wouldn't that encourage more women to get married because they'd have more options? Or would they not get married because they have more options?
Oh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But then you have lots of single or like bachelor men as well.
Right.
So China has also made it harder for women to leave their marriages, which has only made women hesitate more about entering into one. So in 2011, China's marriage law was reinterpreted so that women who wanted a divorce would lose their rights to marital property unless their name was on the title deed. But this traditionally isn't done. So basically it was guaranteed they would lose marital property.
What's the point of getting married then in the first place if you're going to lose everything? Wow.
Well, the idea is that you stay married,
Or else, right?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Okay, and then in 2022, the government implemented a mandatory 30-day wait period before you could finalize your divorce, just, to make sure that you were sure.
Just so you're not doing it just flippantly out of rage.
Right, but then this creates complications, say you're in a domestic violence situation.
Right, yeah.
So on top of that, marriage is also becoming unaffordable thanks to China's struggling economy, record rates of unemployment, and high competition in cities. So young people need, enough money to woo a partner, to throw a wedding, buy a house, and maybe even raise children. And for a lot of people, they're struggling just to keep themselves and their existing family afloat. And then even then, those who decide to get married do so later in life because they want to focus on their careers first. So one demographer estimated that the average age a woman in China marries currently sits at around 30.
30, okay.
So just for fun, can you guess the average age of marriage in Washington, D.C. for women and for men?
For women and for men. See, I'd have to think about it for a long time if I really, really don't make an educated guess.
All right.
So I'm going to guess that for men, this is probably around 35. And for women, I'll just because the men tend to marry women that are younger than them, we'll go with 33.
Okay, so you overshot a little bit.
Okay.
My data is from 2022, but it says 30 for women and 32 for men.
Okay, that's not too far off.
So you are perfectly average marriage-wise.
Great.
And, just as recently as the 2010s, there was this Chinese term called "sengnu," and that means leftover women.
Right.
And it was popularized around that time, really to label and shame women in their late 20s who hadn't gotten married yet. And I thought this sat in pretty direct contrast to there's this classic clip from the American show Broad City, which also aired in the 2010s.
Broad City.
I want to have kids, and I want to get married. thinking, I'm only 27. What am I, a child bride?
Granted, these days, it's become more socially acceptable in China to stay unmarried since more and more people are doing so. But one Chinese woman that RFA interviewed said that young people are rejecting marriage in its current legal and social structure, one that prioritizes marriage itself over the well-being of those in it. So with this in mind, I'm kind of curious how community might change in China over the next few decades as more and more people are not pairing up or staying single.
I guess from the government's point of view, though, that this is all intimately related to the birth rate,
yes,
right? And they want to increase the birth rate, so that's why they're trying to promote marriages. But that's not how it works. You got to actually reform society and make it more conducive to people to want to have kids, right?
Or let's give them a one-time cash payment upon birthing their child.
Yeah, here's $600.
Right.
Have fun for the next 20 years, right? Or more. So. Decreasing birth rate is a problem across all over East Asia. All right, so our second story in the rundown is a bit of a lighter note. Often the bulk of the stories you hear about at RFA tend to be about really bad news. So we've got declining birth rates is one of them. Protesters being arrested, corrupt governments being corrupt, people being hungry as their leader shows off expensive watches or luxury sedans, internally displaced people, externally displaced people, concentration camps, erasure of cultural identity, development at the expense of public welfare, torture, public executions, war, and things like that.
Good list.
But occasionally, we'll get something that is either neutral or actually good news. And this next story falls under the good news category, I guess depending on your perspective.
Okay.
Are you much of a sports fan?
My interest in sports is completely reserved for men's figure skating. So other than that, I don't know anything.
Okay. Well, I like figure skating, so that's pretty good. I do prefer women's figure skating, unfortunately, so we don't have much in common to talk about. I mean, I guess I could talk about the Battle of the Bryans back in... Do you know what that is even?
No.
It's Brian Orser versus Brian Boitano from the Calgary 1988 Olympics, I think.
One of my favorite male figure skaters is Brian Orser's sword, Yuzuru Hanyu.
Oh.
So
he moved from Kim Yeon-na to her. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Kim Yeon-na was the famous female South Korean figure skater who people still consider to be the best in the world, I think. Well, anyway, let me tell you about an interesting development in the world of men's football, or rather, soccer, for those of us in the United States and Canada and Australia who call it soccer. Yeah.
Right.
So in the campaign for the 2026 World Cup, which will be held...
I haven't
can you
the
guess
slightest...
where? Canada, United States, and Mexico. The Asian Football Confederation held a drawing last week and organized 18 teams into 3 groups for the third round of Asian qualifiers. And these 18 teams include 3 of our broadcast countries, or actually countries where RFA has a bureau, so one or the other. So sorry to Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, Hong Kong, all of which were eliminated in the second round, and also Taiwan, also eliminated in the second round, competing as Chinese Taipei.
Not on its own volition, to be sure.
Oh, what do you mean?
Taiwan, diplomatic forces,
okay. They're not called Chinese Taipei by their own... That's what
wish,
you mean.
yes.
Okay, I see. Okay, so this involves the 3 teams that are still alive, are South Korea, which is a huge football country in Asia, but also, surprisingly, China and North Korea.
North Korea?
Yes. So it was somewhat of a positive outcome for North Korea, which was drawn into Group A, along with Kyrgyzstan, the United Arab Emirates, Uzbekistan, and Qatar, all of which aren't known to be very strong football countries, though Qatar does rank pretty high at 35th in the world. But the team to beat in Group A will be 20th ranked Iran.
So what is North Korea's ranking?
Well, North Korea is ranked 110th in the world, so also not a football juggernaut. But world rankings can be misleading because they take years of match results into account. And so North Korea simply does not play as many matches as the rest of the other countries because of, travel restrictions and that kind of thing. So it's reasonable to suggest that the team is better than 110th.
Does North Korea play lots of international cups or is the World Cup its main?
I mean, there is the Asia Cup, and then I think there's an East Asia Cup also.
Okay. So they do participate, just not...
Occasionally. I think during the pandemic, though, the borders were closed, and they really didn't want people coming into the country. So another wrinkle to this whole thing is that North Korea often does not host their own home games because they don't want lots of foreigners coming into the country, especially during the pandemic when they could bring in the virus. But also because you'd have to like manage all these people with minders, and it becomes difficult. So I think during round 2 they were playing their home games in Vientiane, Laos, and sometimes they've done that in Kuala Lumpur. They've had home matches in I think in Thailand a few times. But anyway, for North Korea, the drawing was advantageous because they avoid Group B, which has South Korea. And now South Korea is in there with 5 other Middle Eastern teams. South Korea got in Group B, Iraq, Jordan, Oman, Palestine, and Kuwait. So you can see that's like not a very strong group, right? You know, Palestine, especially with what's going on over there.
Right.
So South Korea is probably going to have a cakewalk through Group B. But if North Korea were in there, they would probably be like the second best team, probably.
Interesting.
However, the problem is they'd be with South Korea and probably lose twice. And that's not very good for optics.
That would be an explosive match, though. North
well, I mean,
versus
they have done that before several times. Usually, though, they fly like they have a neutral flag and they don't play national anthems and stuff. It's usually friendly matches, but
I see. It's
very rare if they actually are put in a group together. Then there's Group C. This is called the Group of Death. Do you know what the Group of Death means?
I have heard this expression before.
Okay.
It's just all the strong teams.
Yeah,
right?
So the way they all get drawn into it. And this group is Japan, Australia, Saudi Arabia. All of them, they've made the World Cup, I think, 6 times each.
I do remember Japan's performance in the last World Cup, which was fun. Against Spain and Germany, the upsets.
Right. And then, of course, South Korea's in 2002, we all remember.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to the Group of Death. You also have China and Indonesia. Both of those countries have made the World Cup once. And then, but Bahrain, which they haven't been there before. But it'll be a miracle if any of these teams, the lower ranked teams, get out of the round because of all the strong competition at the top with Japan, Australia, and Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Can North Korea make it into the World Cup then?
Yeah. So this is the third round of qualifiers. They have to finish among the top 2 in their group, which is going to be a little bit difficult. But given that Iran is the only strong competition, they could get into second. But even if they don't get first or second, they can try to finish in third or fourth, which is doable in a group like this. If that happens, then they'll go to a 4th round of qualifiers. And if they can qualify, if they win their group in the 4th round.
Okay, and if they lose, they're eliminated?
Not exactly, because if they get in second place in the 4th round, then they go on to round 5, which would be against the other second place team.
Okay. You know, like, have you seen that meme where it's like, my friend explains board game rules to me, and my face is like, oh.
Well, I mean, it's not that interesting to talk about. I mean, we're talking about first you'd have to get out of the 3rd round, and then the 4th round, and then the 5th round. And after the 5th round, if you win the 5th round, which is against only one other team, you don't automatically qualify for the World Cup, but you go into something called the Interconfederation Playoffs.
Okay.
Which would be against some mediocre teams from either Africa or South America or Oceania or North America. And then out of those places, the top 2 will go to the World Cup. So they have many roads to the World Cup. The easiest way for them to get there would be to finish in 1st and 2nd in the 3rd round. But anyway, we're going to follow North Korea and China over the next year to see if they get any major upsets and if they qualify for the World Cup or the next round. And that should be fun. China has made just one appearance, as I said before, in the 2002 World Cup in Korea and Japan. And North Korea has been there twice, once in 1966, where they had an amazing upset against Italy. And that was in, I think, in England. And then in 2010 in South Africa. In our reporting for RFA on this, the Korean service actually spoke to a fan of the North Korea team. His name is Paul Han, and he's a North Korean escapee who lives in Indianapolis, Indiana. And he said that he cheers for the North Korean players, especially if they play against South Korea, the United States, or Japan. But that's not because of loyalty to the country or anything like that. He says it's a matter of the fate of those players because, quote unquote, they can be sent to a place where the sun and moon cannot be seen.
Ominously poetic.
He is implying that they could be punished if they lose to any of those games.
I see.
Right. In 2010, North Korea lost all 3 of its matches in South Africa, so RFA reported that the team was shamed and reprimanded in a closed-door meeting of around 400 people, and also they were made to criticize their head coach.
Man, that kind of makes me want to cheer for them a little bit too.
It's like, I don't want these guys to go to the gulag.
Yeah.
Please win.
Good luck.
I mean, you said you're not much of a sports fan, but what about when the World Cup is around? Isn't it fun to like be in that atmosphere at all?
Yeah, for sure. I watch the highlights if there's an exciting game.
Highlights.
Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, like, when it's here in 26, I mean, there's all the bars are going to be hopping and everything. Unfortunately, DC was not selected as a host city.
And why would it be?
I think it's kind of pathetic. I mean, this is the capital of the country. You kind of should. I mean, you got Atlanta, right? Why is Atlanta better than us?
I guess maybe they have more space.
I think it's because our stadium here is not very good.
Yeah.
But Baltimore got chosen too. That's kind of.
Oh.
No, Philadelphia. Sorry. I
okay.
got confused. All right. Well, that wraps it up for today's rundown. Stay tuned for How It's Made.
어떻게 만들었지? WC打嘞。怎么做的?
How it's made.
This is Thich Minh Tue. He's a Vietnamese monk that's gone viral for his barefoot pilgrimage across the country. But is he really a monk? He certainly has all the trappings of a monk. The shaven head, the alms bowl, the long flowing robes. But he's not part of the official state-sanctioned Vietnam Buddhist Sangha. In fact, he doesn't consider himself to be a monk. He's just a man who lives an ascetic lifestyle and strives to follow by the Buddhist teachings. So basically a monk. On June 2nd, he and several of his followers were detained by police. He disappeared for a few days, and on June 10th, police published a video of him saying he stopped his pilgrimage due to safety concerns as he was drawing large crowds. Some say, though, that the authorities shut him down because his popularity has drawn attention to the lack of religious freedom in Vietnam. And since then, police have been cracking down on people just for posting about Tue on social media. That's a possible indication that the authorities fear what he represents.
All right. Thanks for the explainer, Eugene.
Yep.
So now we have joining us from the Taipei office, Truong Son, here to talk more about the situation.
All right. So Truong Son is, of course, part of the Vietnamese service and part of our staff in Taipei. Welcome to the podcast, Son.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We know it's 1 a.m. over in Taipei, so we'll be efficient with our questions.
So first question, can you please tell us a little bit about Thich Minh Tue?
Yes, I have to say Thich Minh Tue has been the hottest topic in Vietnam in recent weeks. He is a Buddhist monk, even though he himself said that he is not a monk. That's what he said. But everybody in the country call him a monk. And what interesting about him is that he practiced this kind of Buddhist school that is so contradictory to the rest of the entire Buddhist church that is recognized by the government. And in recent weeks, he has become a phenomenon that attracts millions and millions of people in the country. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about him actually.
Actually, this is one of RFA's better performing stories. Every time we have a meeting, always Greg, who was on our podcast before, goes through the numbers and he's like, well, once again, it's Thich Minh Tue who's leading the numbers that we're getting here. So what exactly is it about this story that seems to resonate with the Vietnamese public?
Yeah, you know what? Within the Vietnamese service, we ask the same question. Why do people pay so much attention about him? And you are right. Almost everything that we write or covered about him automatically, got a lot of attention from our audience in the country, especially given the media landscape in Vietnam, where the press are not able to freely express themselves. We seek the opportunity to fully, go in there and dig the story deep. So back to Thich Minh Tue, I guess what very interesting about him is that he is so authentic and humble and simple, which is so contrast with, the contemporary Buddhist church that is governed by the Communist Party. A little bit of context here for those of you who are listening to this podcast and don't have an understanding of Buddhism in Vietnam. It's the biggest religion in the country.
Right.
I would say 80% of the population identify themselves as, somewhat Buddhist practitioner, on different level. So that tells you how big Buddhism is in the country of Vietnam with 100 million people, right? And the problem is there is only one Buddhist church that is recognized by the government. And
I see.
run by the government as well. But this monk, he said that, oh, I'm not a monk and I don't belong to any church. I am just a follower of Buddha, trying to do what he teach. So people found him so authentic and so humble, and he reject anything that people have to offer. No money, no clothes, no shelter, no nothing. Only thing he takes from people is food. And he only accept one meal a day. Doesn't matter how many thousand people wanted to offer him food. He would only accept one small portion of food that is enough for himself a day, and that's it. So I guess his background, the way he practiced Buddhism, is so different from the rest of the Buddhist church that is monopolizing the practice of Buddhism in the country. That's why people find him so fascinating. Yeah.
So what is it that sets him apart? You keep saying that he's so pure and unique, humble, opposed to the organized Buddhist Sangha. So what are some of the characteristics of the state religion that I guess people do not like?
Well, every Buddhist temple is controlled by the government.
Right.
The monks actually are trained by government-run Buddhist academy.
Oh, I see.
You can't just be a monk and then manage a temple in Vietnam. You actually have to be trained by government-run academy. You have to be enlisted by the Buddhist church, which is, by the way, run by the government, in order for you to have a certificate so that you can manage a Buddhist temple. So problem is almost every Buddhist temple is managed by, monks that is recognized by the government. But problem in Vietnam is that these monks are not very much enthusiastic about teaching, the way of Buddha, but more about helping the government to control the public, to make sure that people, believe in the party, make sure that people, not care too much about politics, but focus on their faith only. But not just that, the contemporary Buddhism in Vietnam has been criticized a lot by the people for spending too much money on building new temple, project that's cost hundreds of millions of US dollar is actually very normal thing in Vietnam nowadays. And monks are apparently very rich. People are so upset. Can you believe that monks publicly display the collection of fancy watch, fancy cars, So people are so fed up with that. So when Thich Minh Tue appears, a person who walked barefoot cross country, can you believe that? Thousands of miles, not just once, but many times over. He just walked along the road by himself, begging for food once a day, refusing any money, refusing any sort of donation, any sort of help. And he only sleep in cemetery or under a tree. So people just found him like, oh my God, he is what we need, He is what we need. He is here to remind us that this is what Buddhism is supposed to be. Not that kind of fancy rich monk that we have in those temples. So I guess that's why he's become such a phenomenal in Vietnam these months.
Interesting. So I guess there's like deeper layers when he's saying like, I'm not a monk, don't call me one.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Buddhism is the largest religion, and I'm kind of curious because an RFA report described Tue's supporters as, those who are fed up with state-backed Buddhism. Could you give us an idea of, what percentage of Vietnamese Buddhists feel similarly compared to the percentage who, wholeheartedly follow this state-backed Buddhism?
What happened is that people now realize that, so the church has been obeying the government and basically serve as a tool for the government to control the people. So now there is this kind of awakening, moment in Vietnam with among these Buddhist followers. It's hard to tell as to how many percent of them are now, realizing this issue and turning their back on the recognized Buddhist church. Because, well, there is no independent media in Vietnam. There is no independent poll service in the country to actually get us that figure. But I would say that based on our coverage of this story, we look at all the comments, see how people react to our, coverage. I would say the vast majority of the public now realize a problem and, turning their back on the Buddhist church.
So my impression of Thich Minh Tue's story was that it sounded a bit like the movie Forrest Gump. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's
I have.
Where Forrest Gump, this assuming guy, goes on a cross-country journey and he accidentally attracts this huge following along the way who he inspires. But the difference, of course, is that Tue was detained by police in Vietnam. You touched on this a bit, but I'm wondering your thoughts on what, I guess, was perceived as unlawful or threatening to the state that caused them to detain him.
The thing is, in a society like Vietnam, which is, by the way, governed by a communist party, the thing that they fear the most is losing control over people's mind.
Wow.
That is what they fear the most. They wouldn't feel threatened if there is a protest, because people feel angry, they protest and they go home, right? Nobody talk about ideology. But to the Communist Party, ideology is the most critical thing to them, So perhaps they perceive Thich Minh Tue is someone who is about to bring a revolution in terms of ideology. In terms of ideology, people change the way they perceive things. That is the most scary thing to the ruling party. That's why they have to put an end to this. Can you imagine millions of people follow him on Facebook and tens of thousands waiting for him everywhere he walked past by? So in a dictatorship, that is scary. That is scary. In a dictatorship, nothing is more scary than that. A single man attracts millions of people. And this man is preaching things that is so contradictory to what is backed by the government. Remember, the Buddhist church is backed by the ruling party. So if people turn their back on the registered Buddhist church, that means they're turning their back on the party, because the party support the Buddhist church. The party run the Buddhist church. So if people realize that the Buddhist church is so corrupted, sooner or later they would realize that the party is actually behind all this. So they need to put a stop to this. That's why they treat Thich Minh Tue as someone who threatened their power to the core. That's why they attack, they ambush him instead of just, having a talk with him. Yeah.
He appeared in a public video on June 10th, and he said that he stopped the pilgrimage on his own for safety reasons, because he said, there's a lot of crowds following me, so for safety reasons, we have to stop. But there are a lot of people, obviously, who say that he was forced to say that. Do we have any evidence that he was forced to say that? And if not, why do people think so?
Well, there's no evidence. The thing is, there was only one interview that was, broadcast on national television, and that was the only source that people had. And if you live in a communist country long enough, you learn to suspect whatever the communists tell you, because, there is no free press, right? There is no, contradiction. There is no freedom of, debate and challenge government narrative. There is no independent journalist going there and interview him. All people got was a short video clip produced by the national television telling people that this is what Thich Minh Tue said. And he said that he wished to be left alone because of this, because of that. If you live in Vietnam long enough, or in China, you learn to distrust even what that person say on TV.
Right.
Why?
Yeah.
Because you never know what pressure that person is under. You
Mhm.
know, you never know. Even someone appear on TV admitting all the crime that person commit, people would tend to suspect, is that true though? Or is that person saying that because maybe there is a gun is actually behind his neck? Something like that. So people, what I noticed is that people totally rejected the notion that Thich Minh Tue is willing, to go into hiding. People totally rejected that notion. And right after that video was published by the national television, there was a wave of conspiracy theory and rumors on social media saying that the government kidnapped him, the government forced him to say so, the government is even trying to kill him. So all sort of conspiracy theory was like spreading like mushroom after the rain on social media. And what does that tell you? That tell you that people don't trust what the government is telling.
And then we heard on July 1st, RFA reported that Toya had been missing for 20 days. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so after that appearance on national television, people spread a lot of rumors and conspiracy theory. So the government was forced to actually release another footage. Apparently, it was the same interview, but it's a different part of the interview that they released a few days later, just to tell people that the first video was legit. But that didn't help.
That sounds like a hostage
That didn't help
situation.
either.
But
that didn't help either. After that, people actually found him in his hometown, where his parents live. So people found him. He was found doing meditation with one of his followers in a very humble hush in the countryside, rural area. And then people started coming in, trying to see him. Thousands of people started pouring into that area. And then he went missing. His brother actually filed a missing person report to the police. His own brother, telling the police that I couldn't find him. He told me that he will go do his own thing and he will come back within 7 days. But it has been 20 days and he hasn't returned. So his own brother telling this information, and there was a video footage of his own brother telling this kind of information. So now another round of conspiracy theory and rumors. People are telling each other that maybe the government killed him already. Maybe the government is put him under house arrest somewhere, or they are keeping him somewhere. They don't want him to be found anymore. So now the government is under enormous pressure to actually find him and do something to show people that he is actually still alive. Otherwise, there will be big trouble. Yeah.
All right. A recurring theme in our Thich Minh Tue coverage has been that Vietnam's constitution is supposed to protect the religious freedom. Obviously, from the story, it appears like that is not the case. Do you think that the developments with the Thich Minh Tue story will eventually make Vietnam perhaps re-examine its wording of that particular article in the Constitution, or to maybe change things such that they're upholding freedom of religion better, or will things just get worse?
I wouldn't expect the government to change the law or their behavior, but I actually would expect people to change the perception when it comes to religious freedom, and hopefully, eventually, because the society changed, so the government had to change. But before the government change, I think they would still try to do everything they can to control. Yeah.
Okay.
If you don't mind me going off script, when you say to do everything they can to control, Thich Minh Tue's story really started off on TikTok, right? With his followers chronicling his journey. Do you think the government will try to, I guess, do more censorship to prevent another Thich Minh Tue in the future? It's already happening on Facebook. A lot of people are now complaining that their posts about this story, this incident has been censored. But the most
effective means of censorship is to force people to self-censor. And how government do that? They threaten to put you in jail if you talk about it. So there are lots of people have been fined, for what the government say, posting fake news or incorrect information, misleading information on social media in regard to this story. And the Buddhist Church of Vietnam, that is recognized by the government, have actually mentioned in one of their statements that they would pursue, legal punishment for those who defame them. Can you imagine a Buddhist organization threatened to put people in jail? That is just so ironic. So yes, and the police has been working hard. But you know what interesting in Vietnam? If you use social media in Vietnam, there are two completely different worlds that you might find yourself in. One world is relatively free. That depending on who you follow and who you friend with. If you follow people with independent mind, trying to say what they think, sharing, information from more trustworthy source, then your mind is sane. But if you only follow people that are pro-government, then you live in an entirely different bubble. It's like in the upside down.
Right.
So the propaganda machine has been working very, very hard. My job is actually following what the propaganda machine is talking about, because that is the best way to know what's the government attitude towards a certain topic, right? And when it comes to this topic, if you follow government propagandas, if you follow social media accounts that known for mouth-piercing government propaganda, is very, very hostile towards freedom of religion. It's very, very hostile towards Thich Minh Tue. They publicly mock him. They publicly, discredit him. And they try very hard to convince people that he is not a monk and there is nothing there to follow. So the government, in terms of, information warfare, has already invested a lot in convincing people to not following Thich Minh Tue. So yes, to answer your question, there will be a lot more effort if this story continue to attract attention from the public. Yeah.
I wonder, though, don't people see that the level of effort that the government is putting into trying to stop people from following him, don't they see that and they say, wow, maybe he's real and I should follow him because the government is telling me not to? Is there anything of that like that going on at all?
Exactly. If you live in country like Vietnam long enough, you tend to develop that kind of instinct, You should do whatever the government tell you not to.
So I guess it's kind of ironic that they're putting so much effort into that and actually helping his cause.
Exactly, but sometimes government like in Vietnam, they function in according to their own logic, and we just don't understand their logic.
All right, are there any final thoughts that you have on this particular story?
Well, I think this story has been amazing. It's definitely the story of the year in Vietnam. Definitely,
maybe the decade.
Wow.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, it has because the impact that it has on the Vietnamese society is so deep and so significant that I don't think we can grasp the whole picture right now. Mm-hmm. Perhaps it will take years until we fully understand the impact of Thich Minh Tue towards the Vietnamese society. But I think whatever impact that he has on the society is only positive.
Yeah, I wonder if in the future, maybe when the story dies down, if RFA Vietnamese could actually try to get an interview with him. That would be amazing, right?
That would be amazing, yeah.
All right. Well, I would like to thank you for coming on RFA Insider for our 10th episode.
Yeah,
and
thank you so much.
This draws the 10th.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. And this draws the 10th episode to a close. For Amy Lee, I'm Eugene Pong. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with episode 11.
Stay cool.